friends, welcome to Developing Success. I am Neha Agarwal and today we are going to complete the Ecology part 4, and I hope you have revised all the previous lectures of part 1, 2 and 3. So in the part 4 of this lecture we will be completing this topic, the energy flow in an ecosystem. And this topic is very important because the total biotic interaction, what we have studied till now we will be doing it in a diagrammatic representation. So food chain, food web and ecological pyramids, these three are the most important one. This last fourth topic is biological magnification, and I have prepared a separate lecture for this. In the lecture 5, part 5, I will be doing this, and we will also complete some international conventions in regard to the biological magnification, and those are important because India is also a signatory to all those international conventions. So now we start with the food chain. So what is a food chain? If I simply ask you what is a food chain, so food chain is nothing but it is a predator and prey relationship. It is a predator and prey relationship. It is very simple. As if I talk about the food chain, I will ask you that where does a food chain begin? So for example, there are two food chains. There are two particular food chains. One is the grazing food chain, grazing, and the another one is detritus food chain. In the previous lecture I told you about the detritus and detrivores. I'll be repeating it again. So actually these two food chains are interconnected. Okay, so if every food chain is interconnected, it is not possible for us to find the starting point of a food chain. So the starting point of a food chain will always take the one who is a producer. From there it will be taken. So obviously there must be some organisms which can produce their own food. So they are the green plants and they are called the producers. So the plants are eaten by other organisms, and then these other organisms are consumed by some other group of organisms, and thus the food chain and the food web develops. So a producer is any organism. It can be any organism that can convert inorganic matter into food. So producers are thus the foundation of both the food chains and the food webs. So that is why the main process in this food chain is the photosynthesis. Without photosynthesis, no plants and no producers can survive. And if the plants and producers cannot survive, the consumers will not be able to survive, because all the consumers in this ecosystem are heterotrophs. So what are heterotrophs? Heterotrophs are those organisms which cannot make their own food and they are dependent on other organisms for their food. Those are the heterotrophs. So who are the producers? So producers are called the autotrophs. So this is a chart on the food chain which I have made for you. So the food chain always starts with the producer, and the producers are called the autotrophs. So the autotrophs are mainly the green plants. They can be the cyanobacteria, they can be phytoplankton, they can be algae. So all these algae, phytoplankton, cyanobacteria, they produce their own food. So if they produce their own food, the very important thing about them is the photosynthesis. So we'll discuss about photosynthesis here. So photosynthesis, as you must have studied since your childhood. So photosynthesis, what do plants do here? They actually take the free energy. So what are the free energies which are available? So free energy, first of all, they use the sunlight, and sunlight, after that they will be using the carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide from the atmosphere they will be taking, and how they will be taking? They will be taking this CO2 from the leaves, through the leaves, and the last thing they will be taking is water, and this water they will be taking from the roots. So from the soil to the roots, and they will be combining all these three, and it will be interacting with the chlorophyll. So what is the chlorophyll? Chlorophyll is the green pigment which is present in the plant, and they will be combining this chlorophyll, and then what will be coming out? The coming out will be energy, or you can also call it will be converted into food. And what is that food? Tell me, what is that food? So that food is known as carbohydrates, and then oxygen is also produced. So this is the process of photosynthesis. So you can see one thing, that photosynthesis is not possible without the sunlight, or without the atmosphere, or without the water. So from here, a question arises that is photosynthesis possible in the water bodies, in the aquatic ecosystem, in the seas, in the oceans. So if I tell you, if this is the ocean brim, so and the sunlight is here, till the point the rays of the sunlights are penetrating, the photosynthesis is possible, because in the water they will be using this light and they will be converting the energy into food. But deep down in the deep sea, they will not be able to perform the function of photosynthesis because the sunlight is not reaching there. So there is another process, and that is known as chemosynthesis. They will be performing chemosynthesis and they will be making their own food, the autotrophs, from where the food chain will start. So what is chemosynthesis? Chemosynthesis will be conversion of the CO2 plus the hydrogen sulfide. So hydrogen sulfide is present deep down into the sea, and hydrogen sulfide and CO2 will be combined, and what will be produced? It will be glucose and sulfur compounds. So this will be produced, and this process is known as chemosynthesis. So chemosynthesis in the deep ocean where there is no sunlight will be performed by the use of chemicals, and the process occurs around the hydrothermal vents, 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 where green sulfur bacteria are able to combine with the hydrogen sulfide, the carbon dioxide and oxygen to produce some glucose and sulfur compounds. So this process is known as chemosynthesis. So by the way of photosynthesis and chemosynthesis, the autotrophs are surviving and they are making their own food. So again we come to the food chain. So now the autotrophs, the producer thing is cleared. So but these autotrophs also create waste, and this waste is what? Leaf litter. It can be leaf litter. Plant can create leaf litter. They can give you fruits, they can give you buds. These are the things which are the external things. So the next, these plants will be eaten by the primary consumers. So the primary consumers can be a grasshopper. Okay, the primary consumer can be a cow, the primary consumer can be a rabbit, it can be a goat, and so on. So these are the primary consumers, and let me tell you that when the primary consumers are talked of, they can only eat the autotrophs. Okay, that is why they are known as the primary consumers. If they are also eating other animals, and if they are also eating the plants, they will not be called primary consumers, they will be called secondary consumers. So primary consumers will always be a herbivore. So what do you mean by herbivore? Herbivores are those animals, those organisms which feed only on the green plants, and they don't eat the meat of any other animal. So that is why this word is used, primary consumers. Next will be the secondary consumers. So they can be omnivores or they can be carnivores also. For example, at this place, there can be one animal which eats cow only, and there can be an animal which eats cow and also the grasses. So they will be known as omnivores. But the organism which is just eating the other's meat, it will be known as carnivores. And the last one, tertiary consumer, they are also carnivore. They can eat primary, secondary consumers. They will surely not eat the autotrophs. That is why they are the tertiary and the last type of consumers. Generally, a food chain does not go beyond this. They can go, but generally it does not go. And one more thing, if the autotrophs are producers, because they create their own food, all the consumers like primary, secondary and tertiary, all the consumers are heterotrophs. Why they are heterotrophs? So what is the definition of heterotrophs? Heterotrophs are those organisms which cannot make their own food and they are dependent on some other organisms for their food needs. Is it clear? Next we see the waste category. So what waste all these organisms are generating? As I told you, autotrophs will be generating leaf litter, and all these consumers, the primary, the secondary and the tertiary, they will be creating the fecal matter, and also after death they will be creating their carcasses. So both are waste product. So what happens to this waste thing? This waste thing will be decomposed. So the next step in this food chain will be decomposition, and the function of decomposition will be performed by decomposers and detrivores. So who are decomposers? Decomposers are the microorganisms which we can call as bacteria and fungi, not virus. Mind you, note down here that they are bacteria and fungi. And detrivores are the animals which feed on this waste. So detrivores are the animals which feed on this waste. So when they feed on the waste is cleared. So in this process, there are some other small processes which are performed. So these processes are known as fragmentation. I will give you the definition, I will explain you. And the next process is leaching. And then you have mineralization. And one more process you have in this decomposition is catabolism. Catabolism. So I will explain you one by one what is fragmentation. So if I talk about the earthworms, okay, so the earthworms are not bacteria or fungi, so they will be called detrivores. So what they do, they will break down the detritus matter. What is detritus matter? The waste matter. So the earthworms, they will be breaking down the detritus matter into smaller particles, and this breaking down is known as fragmentation. So this function is performed by the detrivores. And what is done here? Fragmentation is done of whom? Of the waste matter. Now what happens? By the process of leaching, the next comes leaching. By the process of leaching, water soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil. They penetrate down into the soil and get precipitated. Okay, so this process is called leaching. So after this fragmentation, some part which has been properly powdered into soil form, they will be leaching down into the soil horizon, and they will be returning the nutrients into the soil again. So this process will be known as leaching. And after that, the waste matter which is left, which is not consumed by the detrivore after fragmentation, and which has not been leached down into the soil after fragmentation, what will be happening? The process of catabolism will be coming here. So the bacterial and the fungal enzymes will degrade this detritus matter into further simpler inorganic substances. Okay, and this process will be known as catabolism. So actually this fragmentation is being performed by detrivore, but this catabolism function is being performed by bacteria and fungi. Okay, and the last thing, if you ask me what is mineralization, I will just tell you. There is one more topic which we need to do here is humification. Humification. So I just now told you about the leaching, that the fragmented matter, when they penetrate deep into the soil and return the nutrients to the soil, that process is known as leaching. So it is important to note here that in decomposition, many processes are involved. So there is another one thing is humification. I just told you humification. So humification and mineralization occur during decomposition in the soil. Okay, they are the soil decomposition factors, they are the soil decomposition processes, and humification and mineralizations occur during the decomposition in the soil. So humification, what it does, humification leads to the accumulation of substances which are called humus. Okay, what are humus? If the leaves are falling on the ground and these leaves are not actually fragmented properly, and they do not leach down, so what will they do? They will occupy the upper surface of the soil and they will degrade very slowly. So why are they degrading slowly? Because they are resistant to the microbial action. They are resistant to the action of bacteria and fungi. They are resistant to the action of the enzymes which these bacteria and fungi are releasing. So they have a power. So what they do, they will be staying on the ground surface, on the soil surface for a long period of time, and when they degrade slowly, they will become black color, and this black color substance will be known as humus. So they are nothing but the leaf litter which has turned into black color and settled on the surface of the upper soil is known as humus. So they have a very slow rate of decomposition, and they are the reservoir of nutrients. As we know, from this leaf only the nitrogen will be going back to the soil, so they are very fertile also. So the humus is further degraded by some microbes, and the release of inorganic nutrients occur. So this humus is being worked upon bacteria and fungi again and again. So when they start degrading, when they start decomposing, the inorganic nutrients occur by the process of mineralization. So this process is mineralization. So I repeat again, in the decomposition, first the fragmentation will happen, and that function will be performed by the detrivores, and detrivores will be fragmenting the waste, and some of the waste will be going deep down into the soil, and this process will be known as leaching. The waste which will not be leaching will be staying on the upper surface, and it will be turning into dark matter, and thus dark matter will be known as humus by the process of humification. Further, when this humus is again degraded and inorganic substances are created, that process will be known as mineralization, and all the microbial action which are happening, so all that process will be known as catabolism. So these are the things, and I have also given you in the notes, like when you go through the PDF file, you will be having this discussion here. You can go to these points, you will be finding that I have given about the catabolism, the humus, the mineralization. There was one extra point which I taught you here, was leaching. So I hope this is clear. Now, decomposers, the organic substances will be CO2, ammonia, these all will be formed. So all the animals which are feeding on the waste, they are known as detrivores. So here the detritus food chain starts. The first we did with the autotrophs, which started from the plants, and this was known as grazing food chain, because plants will be grazed upon. So but now there is a waste product, and on this waste product some animal is surviving, and here starts another food chain, and this food chain will be known as detritus food chain. So all the detritus are known in the ecological term as saprotrophs. So what are saprotrophs? The organisms which feed on the dead and decay matter of some other organism. Okay, I repeat, the organisms which feed on the dead and decay matter of some other organisms are known as saprotrophs. So here starts your detritus food chain. We will see the example. This is a grazing food chain. So grazing food chain will be mainly starting from the grass, as you can see, and on this grass the grasshopper is dependent. On this grasshopper some bird is dependent, some reptiles are dependent on these birds, and these these reptiles are eaten by some other big bird or some other big reptile. So can you see that everyone is a prey and everyone is a predator? So that is why in the starting I told you that food chain is a predator and prey relationship. It is very easy to identify it like this. And the main thing is decomposers. So all the waste generated by the autotrophs and the heterotrophs are decomposed by the bacteria and the fungi, and they are also fragmented by the detrivores. And here you can see a food chain which is an aquatic food chain. Here the main producer is a phytoplankton, and these phytoplanktons, they are very near to the sea brim, they are very near to the continental shelf areas. They are not deep down, because if they will be deep down they will not be able to receive the sunlight penetration. So because of this sunlight penetration, they will be very near to the brim of the water, and they will be eaten by the zooplanktons. The zooplanktons will be further eaten by smaller fishes, and smaller fishes will be eaten by some medium-sized fishes like mackerel and snapper, and these medium-sized fishes and the smaller fishes also will be eaten by the larger fish like shark. So this is an aquatic ecosystem where this thing starts from the grazing food chain, like the phytoplanktons. These are the autotrophs here. Now this is an example of detritus food chain. So the fallen leaves are the first thing, the first one. So fallen leaves are eaten by the earthworms or fragmented by the earthworms, and these earthworms are then eaten by the birds, and these birds are then eaten by some other birds or big reptiles like birds like hawk. So top carnivore is hawk here. Now I want to tell you here that these separate boxes are known as trophic levels. These separate boxes are known as trophic levels. So the food chain jumps from one trophic level to another trophic level. And if I want to give you a definition, the trophic level of an organism is its position in the food chain. It is very simple that you can note down from here, the trophic level of an organism is its position in the food chain. This is the simple definition of trophic level. As your food chain goes further, the trophic level keeps on changing. This is another example of detritus food chain here. Like the dead leaves, they will be eaten by the woodlouse or the earthworms, and they will be then eaten by the birds. So this is the thing, and always remember that it is a very complex circle. It is a very complex system. So if, for example, this bird does not just eat this woodlouse, it can eat the earthworms also, it can eat some small reptiles also, this bird can also eat some small snakes, isn't it? So this bird is just not dependent on one species, it can be dependent on many species. So if it is dependent on some other species, another food chain starts here, another food chain starts here also. So a complex structure is created. Now this leaf, this dead leaf, is just not eaten by this woodlouse, it can be eaten by some other earthworm also, is it? So, and this earthworm can be eaten by some other bird species. So this is a complex chain, okay? And when we consider some 4, 5, 6, 7 chains together, that is known as food web. That system will be known as food web. And you can see a diagram of the food web here. Like this owl is just not dependent on the mice here, it is also dependent on the grasshopper. And on this grass, the grasshopper is dependent, the rabbit is dependent, some other cow will be dependent, some other goat will be dependent. So if you just consider this part, this will be one food chain. But if you consider all the relationships, it turns into a food web. So food web is actually the good representation, is actually the better representation when we compare it with a food chain. Is it clear, everybody? So what is a food web? If I ask you, so in nature, food chains intersect in many ways. Since one species eats many different species and also gets eaten by many other different species. So thus we have food webs which are networks of interconnected food chain. So this is one food chain, this is another food chain, this will be another food chain. So these are interconnected, and when we see it in an interconnected way, we can call it a food web. So what are food webs? Here I have written for you, networks of interconnected food chains. So food chains intersect in many ways since one species eats many different species. For example, one bird can eat the woodlouse also, can eat the earthworm also. And then this one bird they can be eaten by many other different species also, okay? So interdependency is too much, and one thing is universal, that if the interdependency is too much, the ecosystem is stable. Why? Because if one animal is just dependent on one animal, and if this animal gets extinct, this animal will be also getting extinct, isn't it? So if this animal is dependent on 4 other species, and one animal if gets extinct, it will not be affected too much and it will be surviving. So that is why a very complex ecosystem will be a very stable one. If the ecosystem's food chain and food web structure will be simple, it will not be stable. Okay, so both food chain and food web shows that the living beings are interconnected and they are independent. There is a complex flow of matter and energy on the earth. Yes, the flow is very complex. So this is where the food chain and the food webs discussion ends. And if you have any doubt in the food chain and food web discussion, you can comment me on the comment section, and for the developing students, they can also WhatsApp me and ask me. So up to here it is complete, and now we jump into the other section, and that is the ecological pyramid. So what is ecological pyramid? They are the diagrammatic representation of the energy flow. See, food chain and food web were also the diagrammatic representation, but there we read it in a complex way. We took into account many food chains, and then we compared them through an interconnected chain, and we converted into a food web. But here we will be turning them into a diagram approach like a pyramid. And in my opinion, this ecological pyramid is not actually the good way of analysis in an ecosystem, because it just considers one food chain at a time. If you just consider one food chain at a time, it will not give you a true picture, because one animal is dependent on many other animals, and that animal is again dependent on many other animals. So a true picture doesn't come out when we consider the ecological pyramid. Still we need to do So what is a why have they taken pyramid? This pyramid indicates that the parameters generally reduce in quantity as we move up to the higher trophic level. So you know what is a trophic level? The levels which the organisms, pass on to from one to another. So these are the trophic levels. So what is reduced in energy is reduced when we go higher into the level, trophic level. Biomass is reduced, and also the size of the population is reduced. How is this possible? See, here I will show you a diagram. This is known as pyramid of numbers, and pyramid of numbers, you can see that there are many grass, okay, and like one grasshopper just not eat one stripe of the grass, it can eat this part, the whole. So one grasshopper is dependent on this. So when the trophic level goes up, the population will be decreasing. Like one frog, one toad will be eating some 4 or 5 grasshoppers, and this then 2 3 toads will be eaten by one snake, and then 2 3 snakes will be eaten by one hawk. So as you go up in the trophic level, the energy, the biomass, the number, they decrease. But sometimes they can increase also, as on one tree many birds are depending. So many birds are eating the fruit from just one tree, and then this one piece of bird, then one individual of the bird, many insects can survive. Okay, so here the pyramid is inverted because as we go up in the trophic level, the quantity, the population increases. That is why this pyramid is known as pyramid of numbers. The actual numbers are taken here and they are represented diagrammatically. I tell you once again that this is not a complete true picture, as they are not considering some other animals which are dependent on these animals which they have taken in this chart. So this is known as the pyramid of numbers. You can read the definition from here. You can read. So this is pyramid of numbers. So pyramid of numbers represent the total number of individual of different species at each trophic level. So depending upon the size, the pyramid may not always be upright and may even be completely inverted. The spelling is wrong. It will be inverted. So it is very difficult to count all the organisms in the pyramid of number, and so the pyramid does not completely define the structure of an ecosystem. I told you before, it does not completely give you the true picture. Next kind of pyramid is the pyramid of biomass. So we'll read the definition from here. The pyramid of biomass is usually determined by collecting all the organisms at all the trophic levels and measuring their dry weight. Okay, so this is the punch word here, this is the key word here, dry weight. This overcomes the size difference problem because all kinds of organisms at each trophic level are weighed. So biomass is measured in gram per meter square. The biomass of any species in terms of dry weight is more accurate. So the pyramid of biomass can be upright, inverted, or irregular in shape, like this. If we can see, they will consider the dry weight of all the things, and then they will compare what was the weight at this trophic level, what was the weight at this trophic level, and then according to it the pyramid will start. It can also come in this shape. So this shape can also be there. So because it is getting many shapes, it is again not a true picture, because the other ecosystems, which are the other food chains and food webs which are related to the same food chain which they have taken, are not considered. So this is the pyramid of biomass. I've taken the same picture here, pyramid of biomass. And the last thing here will be the pyramid of energy. So to compare the functional roles of the trophic levels of an ecosystem, the pyramid of energy is most suitable, they say. So this pyramid represents the amount of energy at each trophic level and loss of energy at each transfer to another trophic level. Hence the pyramid of energy is always upright. Why always upright? Because energy will always be lost as you it will always be lost as you go up in the higher trophic levels. So what is the reason for this? So there is a reason, because there is a 10% rule which applies to this thing, and that 10% rule is, I will just tell you that the number of trophic levels in the grazing food chain is restricted as the transfer of energy follows 10% law. So only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower trophic level. In nature, it is possible to have so many levels, like producer, herbivore, primary carnivore, secondary carnivore, and it is not possible that when energy is transferred from one level to another, it will not be lost. So I have compiled here three reasons why this 10% law is there. So these three reasons are: first of all, an organism does not digest all the food that it eats. So the undigested food does not provide any energy. Next is, some energy is used up just in the process of living. The animal which is in the lower trophic level, that animal also needs some energy to survive. So then when it is using that energy is lost. And there is always a loss when energy is transferred from one form to another. There will always be a loss. So this is what is known as 10% law. And 10% law mein what happens, that as you move up, the energy which is transferred is 10% and the energy which is lost is around 90%. So this is known as the pyramid of energy. So when a primary consumer eats a producer, it takes energy from the producer. Okay, so it is a law of nature that when such energy transfer takes place, a very substantial part, that is around 90% of the energy, is lost and less useful. Okay, so there is a gain of there is again a loss of 90% energy when a secondary consumer eats a primary consumer. Thus the ecological efficiency, I repeat the keyword, the ecological efficiency of energy transfer from one organism to another is only 10%. So and the reasons I just told you, in these three reasons you can note down these three reasons why it is a 10% law. So at last I will again tell you about the uh, thing that if you consider the pyramid of numbers, your pyramids can be inverted, they can be of irregular shape, they can be of straight ones. If you also talk about the pyramid of biomass, they will be again of different shapes. But the pyramid of energy, the last part which we did, the pyramid of energy, is always upright. Okay, and can never be inverted. It is always upright and can never be inverted because of this 10% law. And when energy flows from a particular trophic level to the next trophic level, some energy is always lost as heat. So each bar in the energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy present at each trophic level in a given time or in a given area. And the criticism which I found in all these ecological pyramids is this: however, these limitations are like it does not take into account the same species belonging to two or more trophic levels, belonging to two or more other food chain system. So this whole ecological pyramid study just considers a single food chain, a very simple and single food chain, something that almost never exists in nature. So it does not accommodate a food web also. So moreover, saprophytes are not given any place in ecological pyramids, even though they play a very vital role in the ecosystem by the process of decomposition. So what is the criticism here? So the criticism is that first of all, they don't consider a web. They just take a simple food chain is taken, and that does not give you a true picture. This is a blunder which they do. And the second thing which they are doing is they are not considering the saprophytes. If you are not considering the bacteria and the fungi, that is okay, but saprophytes are the living organisms. They are also the part of the dry weight. Okay, and this dry weight is not taken, the energy transfer is not taken. Saprophytes are nowhere mentioned in the ecological pyramids. What are saprophytes? They are the detrivores. They are the organisms which feed on the dead and decay matter of the other organisms, like for example woodlouse and earthworms. And from them starts the detritus food chain, the food chain on which the dead and the food chain where the dead leaves are the first one to be eaten. Okay, so saprophytes are not considered, food web thing is not considered. That is why ecological pyramids are not a complete accurate thing to judge the ecosystem, to analyze the ecosystem. So these three were the pyramid of energy, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of numbers. And we just completed the three levels, and the three levels of the energy flow, and the three levels were the food chain and the food web and the ecological pyramid. So this part we have completed, and in next lecture I will come up with the energy flow of the pollutants. So in these pollutants we will be studying about the biomagnification, bioaccumulation, bioconcentration, and to stop this bioaccumulation, concentration in different ecosystems of the world, where we have seen that diseases arise when this type of contaminants flow in our energy system. So these are carcinogens. They have the disease like cancer. They can have neurological disorder. They can also result into mental retardness. So this is a matter of concern. That is why United Nations have come up with some international conventions in which all the countries which are participants follow some policies, rules and regulations to not use or to not overuse these chemicals, so that they do not flow in our energy system, they do not flow in our ecosystem. And we will do all that part in the next lecture, in part 5. So meet you guys then, and revise well. All the best. Thank you.